Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are listening to this. My name is Ivory Duncan. I am the creator of Embracing Neurodiversity. The purpose of this presentation is to provide an insight and an overview to what neurodiversity is and what embracing neurodiversity does. So, what we're going to cover today is obviously, as I mentioned, what we do and what neurodiversity is, but I also want to provide some statistics to paint a larger picture. And then I'm going to give you an overview of some solutions. This presentation's purpose is to introduce those who are not familiar to the concept and the idea of neurodiversity and to provide an overview of the solution. This is not a deep dive. I will be doing deep dives in the future. And so please know that what you're going to hear today is simply skimming the surface. I want to emphasize that because this concept is much more richer than what I am going to present to you today. But before we dive into what neurodiversity is and what embracing neurodiversity does, I want to talk to you a little bit about myself. My name is Ivory. As I mentioned, I am a 12-year educator and an inclusivity and innovation facilitator. I have facilitated many workshops for teachers and educators who do this work with young people. And most importantly, I am a mother. I started embracing neurodiversity from an innate passion to educate others, right? I've been an educator for a while, but I recently shifted into nonprofit and I missed the process of teaching and then learning. I also started neurodiversity to amplify the voices of the most marginalized in our communities. I'm someone who comes from a marginalized community or many marginalized communities, actually. I am a Black woman. I am someone who grew up in poverty. And I am a parent to a Black male child who is on the spectrum. Being a mother of a child on the spectrum is perhaps the primary reason for creating Embracing Neurodiversity, as I am fiercely committed to advocating for a society in which my brilliant Black boy Joy, which is what I call him, and others just like him can be their total selves in this society and thrive, right? And so I'm fiercely committed to that work. And this is where embracing neurodiversity, the consultancy, comes in at. And so, what do? We support workplaces and schools to embrace and enhance the experience of different thinkers. In a nutshell, that is simply what neurodiversity is. If you ever like, what does this mean? This word is new. It simply means people who think differently or someone who thinks differently, right? But I'm going to dive a little bit more into what it actually means later. But we support workplaces and schools in embracing and enhancing the experience of different thinkers by providing strategies and tools and resources. And we do group facilitation, we do consulting, and we do coaching. I want to highlight really quickly the difference between consulting and coaching. Consulting is doing an analysis of where your workplace and or school or organization is currently at as it relates to creating spaces for neurodivergent people to thrive, and then providing you with strategies to enhance where you are, to level you up, if you will. And then coaching is more so rooted in unpacking our mindsets and beliefs about neurodiversity and people who are neurodivergent, right? And so unpacking those social norms that we all have been taught and doing the inner work. That is what the difference between the two are. And that is what we do here at Embracing Neurodiversity. So, what is neurodiversity? It is simply put an idea that people interact with the world around them, and they experience the world around them in many different ways for many different reasons. And there is no one right way of thinking, of learning, and of behaving, right? And my favorite part of what neurodiversity means and what the idea supports is that differences are not viewed as deficits, but in actuality, differences are an opportunity for innovation. So, again, neurodiversity supports the idea and believes in the idea that differences are not deficits, that everyone interacts, engages and experiences the world differently, and there is no one right way of learning, of thinking, and of behaving, as long as it's not hurting anyone, right? I always like to put that in as a caveat. And so I want to talk a little bit about statistics. I love numbers. I'm a big part storyteller, or someone who loves storytelling, but I also love statistics to kind of paint a broader picture and let it sink in for people. And so just to paint an idea of how much of an impact that neurodiversity has on our society. About 15 to 20% of the world's population are considered to be neurodiverse. And here in America, for people on the spectrum, statistically, it's about 1 in 44. And also statistically, the Harvard Business Review found that neurodiverse teams are actually 30% more productive than neurotypical ones, right? And so diverse teams, we know through equity work, are much more productive. And so diversity means your background, your race, your gender. But I want to add in that neurodiversity, which means obviously, as we mentioned before, the way that people think and the different ways of thinking also create innovation and productivity. But lastly, I want to add this in as a adjacent to the productivity of neurodiverse teams, that although we know that teams are more productive when they are diverse, the employment rate for those who are considered to be neurodivergent is around 30 to 40% for adults. And so what this tells us is that people who are neurodiverse are highly capable of producing results and being effective in their workplaces and schools, but it is the mindset of the people in position of power, and the marginalization and the stigma that's placed upon people who are neurodiverse that impacts their ability to thrive. And so what this work that embracing neurodiversity does is to shift that and to allow for us to create spaces in which we change our mindset so that we can change our policies and practices and support those who are different thinkers. So to provide more specific, provide you a list of some of the ways that people can be considered neurodiverse, right? Those who have been diagnosed with dyslexia or ADHD or autism spectrum, Tourette syndrome, an acquired brain injury, mental health barriers, and lifelong health conditions, right? Particularly as it relates to lifelong health conditions, such as multiple sclerosis, chronic fatigue, long-term effects of COVID-19. These can have an impact on the way that your brain functions. It begins to function differently as a result of the effects of your health, right? And it doesn't mean that it functions worse. It just means that it functions differently. Your ability to concentrate shifts, your ability to process shifts, right? And so it's very important to remember that, because all of us can become neurodivergent at any time in our lives based on health conditions, based on trauma, right? Experiences in life that are traumatic affect our mental health, which affects our ability to process information. This really important to remember that because all of us can become neurodivergent at any moment in our lives. However, here at Embracing Neurodiversity, we fundamentally believe in a strength-based approach, and that is essential to this work. A long-term autism researcher named Laurent Montrone wrote a recent scientific editorial in which she points out that a lot of the ways in which we engage people who are neurodiverse, particularly people on the spectrum, is from a place of trying to make them change their behaviors or to suppress some of their behaviors or to intervene when a behavior is not likable to mainstream society, right? But she argues that actually the best way to support and to help someone who is neurodiverse thrive is to instead look at what their strengths are and focus on those, amplify those in order for them to be able to not only feel confident about themselves, but to be productive citizens in society, right? And not only to just be productive citizens, but to have full, thriving lives. That's actually the goal is for every individual to have a full, thriving life. And in order for that to happen, we must focus on the strengths that we all possess, but particularly those of us who are considered neurodiverse and are often looked at as having a deficit. In order to shift that narrative, we have to begin to look at what are the strengths and amplify those. And we'll talk more about the strengths and how they can actually aid in society's evolution in later presentations. Here at Embracing Neurodiversity, we also debunk this concept of normal or normalcy. I highly encourage you all to check out a guy by the name of Jonathan Mooney. I'm a big fan of him. He is a great writer. He is someone who has labeled himself to be neurodivergent. He is a neurodiversity advocate, and he speaks to this concept of leveraging differences rather than extinguishing them, and the idea that normal is a social construct, right? And that there's no one individual in the world that is the same. And so, in order for us to thrive as a society, it's important for us to support and enhance our differences as opposed to suppressing them and seeking to conform. So, what are some ways that we can support? And this is simply an overview. I'm excited to do a deep dive into other ways and solutions and provide other solutions. But at the very base level, it's really important to seek to understand and embrace neurodiversity in communities, in schools, in healthcare settings, and in workplaces, right? And so understanding means as reading, researching, asking questions is essential. And embracing doesn't mean simply to accept. It means to pull in and to create spaces in which people who are different and people who think different can thrive. And so fostering environments that are conducive for neurodiversity. So while we are recognizing and emphasizing the strengths, we are also aware of the areas that need support, right? And so an example of that is someone who's on the spectrum, like my son, which I've mentioned, oftentimes are sensitive to sensory and to regulate. They prefer tactile things or touching tactile things. And so in your workplaces, do you have spaces and opportunities for people to regulate? And it's important to highlight that not only people on the spectrum need opportunities to self-regulate when they're feeling triggered or overwhelmed, but people in general, right? So are there spaces in your workplace for that? Um, is your school aware of and sensitive to people who are sensitive to noise, or essentially is your environment conducive to the learning and the thriving of people who are neurodivergent? And the only way that you'll know that is if you learn what they need, and if you're willing to create spaces for that, right? Because you see opportunity in that. And so I'm going to absolutely talk more about how workplaces and schools can create spaces that are conducive for people to thrive, neurodivergent people to thrive, later. But this is simply an overview and an introduction to what we do. And so I really appreciate the time that you've taken out to dive into this with me. Again, this is simply skimming the surface. If you have questions, I'm absolutely passionate about this work. So please do not hesitate to reach out. This is our website, embracing-neuro-diversity.com. Our email address, we're on Instagram, and we are also on Facebook. Thank you so much for taking out the time to listen, and I look forward to engaging with you.